Good afternoon. Sections of the media, interested persons, the Guyana Forestry Commission would like to thank you for attending today's press conference where we attempt to give the public some information regarding our principles that we use for forest harvesting, as well as to clear up any misconceptions or misunderstanding that might be peddled in the media. We have a sequence in which we would like for today's press conference to go. The first thing we'd like to do actually is to have a brief presentation where we will give you certain facts, certain details, and then after the presentation we would introduce you to the members of the head table, members of the senior and middle managers of the commission, and we would then invite your questions. So without any further ado, could I have the lights dim please so that we can start the presentation? Thank you very much.
Thank you, JP. For those of you who may not know, Mr. Archibald is our corporate secretary. So as JC mentioned, we're going to have the presentation in two parts. One on the principles of sustainable forest management, which we adhere to, and the second one to clarify some erroneous assumptions and misinformation by some sections of the media. First off, we'll start off by telling you a little bit about the GFC. It was established in 1979 and falls under the ministerial responsibility of MNRA, and it's mandated to manage the state forest estate. The next slide shows the legislative policy and procedural framework for the forest sector. We have the Forest Act and the GFC Act, which were recently revised. Also the National Forest Plan and Policy, the Low Carbon Development Strategy, National Competitiveness and National Development Strategy, and importantly, Strategic Plan for the Natural Resources sector. We also have guidelines and procedures as outlined here, of which we will go into more detail. There are approved operational procedures in accordance with the GFC and forest legislation that are board approved and that govern the 4 different areas mentioned here: forest allocation, forest harvesting, processing, and marketing, export of forest products. Let's deal with state forest allocation. All areas to be allocated are publicized countrywide, giving everyone an equal opportunity to apply. There is a review by an internal forest resource allocation committee, which then submits a recommendation to the Commissioner of Forests. The GFC Board Technical Subcommittee is then convened to further review the application. This subcommittee of the board makes its recommendation a forest inventory, a business plan. Also, contrary to reports in the media, limited harvesting of state forest exploratory permits is allowed. TSAs and WCLs is the last category. They are issued once an SFEP condition is satisfied, and the annual allowable cut is again pre-calculated in accordance with the annual operational plan, and these quotas cannot be exceeded. Here you have a summary of the state forest classification. Let me just alert you that, especially members of the media, you're going to have a copy of the presentation. Right? So you don't need to worry about the amount of information that is being given to you. This here will show you that the state forest, total state forest estate, is about 12.6 million hectares. 6.8 or 6.9 million have been allocated, so we still have in reserve 5.7 million hectares of state forest. So contrary to reports again, the forest is not being given out to investors. It is a carefully regulated process in accordance with the board and the government. This is an area and forest resource allocation map. I think we have a larger one on the wall somewhere at the back. State forest harvesting is done in accordance with compulsory guidelines. These include Code of Practice for State Forest Commissions, Code of Practice for Timber Sales Agreement and WCLs. Some parts are also relevant to state forest exploratory permits. Code of Practice for agri-leases and mining leases, and Code of Practice for non-timber forest products. So here we see that for each category of state forest application, we have a specific Code of Practice. Then we have the National Log Tagging and Log Tracking System. The Code of Practices specify the environmental and social best practices that must be complied with by all operators. For SFPs, an annual quota is allotted, and the quota is calculated as follows. 80% of the area is deemed to be productive, and a maximum of 20 meter cube, which equates to about 5 to 10 trees, can be harvested in 1 hectare using a 60-year cycle. Here you have some calculations which explains it better, but this equates to only 1/60th of the area being harvested in any calendar year. So let's assume we have an SFP of 2,500 hectares. We assume that 80% is productive, so let's give us a net productive area of 2,000 hectares. The quota is calculated 2,000 hectares by 20 meter cube per hectare on a 60-year cycle, and that gives you 666.6 cubic meters per year. Now, assuming that 1 tree is equivalent to 2 meter cube, this means that a 666 meter cube is equal to 333 trees per year, over 2,500 hectares. Our research has shown that 50 to 70 trees of 25 centimeters DBH diameter at rest height and above are in a hectare. So therefore, in a SFP of 2,500 hectares, we will have 125,000 to 175,000 trees. And we are only extracting, or we are only permitting them to be extracted 333 trees, which is 0.26% of the entire SFP. So I don't know how the claims of overharvesting and raping the forest have been put out here. There's absolutely no basis for it. This highlights the fact that there is absolutely no clear cutting. To further promote natural regeneration, the trees to be harvested must be 35 centimeters and above at diameter at rest height. The felling distance of trees 35 to 40 centimeters must be 8 meters apart, or approximately 24 feet. This reduces the gap created by the felling of the trees or the canopy opening, and encourages and promotes the regeneration of the species, especially the commercial ones. For timber sales agreements and WCLs, the process is even more rigid. The concession is divided into 100 hectare blocks. TSAs and WCLs operate on a 25 to 60 year cycle, and the maximum allowable cut is again 20 cubic meters per hectare per year on a 60-year cycle. It is prorated. For example, if you cut on a 25-year cycle, you will extract a maximum of 8.33 cubic meters per hectare per year. If you cut on a 30-year cycle, you can extract 10 cubic meters. If you cut on a 60-year cycle, you can extract 20 cubic meters. The productive area is provided by the concessionaire and verified by the GFC. If the concessionaire does not provide it, because they don't have the wherewithal, GFC will determine, using the available information that it has, for example, maps, GIS information, etc. Let's do another calculation now. The annual allowable cut for a TSA with a productive area of 300,000 hectares and are operating on a 60-year cycle would be 300,000 divided by 60 years, which is equal to 5,000 hectares per year that a concessionaire can harvest. 5,000 hectares by 20 cubic meters per hectare per year gives you 100,000 cubic meters per year. So the concessionaire can take out up to a maximum of 100,000 cubic meters. Important to note is that this is the maximum of allowable cut per year. And again, only 1/60th of the concession is harvested per year. The minimum tree diameter is again 35 centimeters diameter at breast height. After selectively harvesting the year 1 annual allowable area of 5,000 hectares, the concessionaire leaves that 5,000 hectares and moves over to the year 2 annual allowable area. And this cycle continues progressively until year 60. Selective harvesting then recommences in the previous year 1 area. I'm going to show it on the table just now. And in the 60 years that elapsed, natural regeneration would have replaced what was taken out in year 1. So here we have the concession of 300,000 acres divided into 60 equal areas. In year 1, 5,000 hectares are harvested. Then in year 2, year 3, year 4, etc. Every year, 5,000 hectares being harvested. Until in year 60, you reach the end of the concession. In year 61, you go back to year 1. And what was taken out in the first year will now be replaced by natural regeneration. This means that you can harvest the concession continuously on a 60-year cycle, taking out 20 cubic meters per hectare. TSA WCLs also have to do the following before harvesting is allowed. Submit an annual operational plan and do a 100% inventory of the commercial species in all the 100 hectare blocks to be harvested in the calendar year. GFC verifies this inventory, and only if acceptable, harvesting is allowed. Let's go back to the example just now. For the TSA, where 300,000 hectares and where 5,000 hectares can be harvested in any year. This will be equivalent to 50 100 hectare blocks. And each of these would have to be inventoried to the satisfaction of the GFC before harvesting is allowed. Logs and stumps are tagged with bar-coded, numbered log tags. And this allows tracing of them back to the origin in the forest. This here is a representation of the log tags. You can see the first tab has a set of numbers, and then the bottom stump. That piece is affixed onto the stump, and the upper portion onto the log or the set of boards that is converted from the log. This provides chain of custody, provides traceability, provides verification of legality. To complement what I just said, we have effective and efficient real-time monitoring. 39 forest stations are located at strategic points countrywide, some of them 24 hours, and the log tags use barcode scanners. They cannot be reused, and we have very efficient databases which we can input the volume of logs, the log tags, etc. So we know if there is any discrepancy. And these also guard against illegal logging and exceeding the quota. We also have a very strong system of documentation and controls. And these were investigated by independent forest monitoring, independent auditors, etc. and found to be very, very effective and functional. Satellite imagery of the entire country at 5-meter resolution. 5 meters is approximately 15 feet resolution. Show that deforestation and forest degradation due to forestry activities was a mere 353 hectares out of a total deforestation and degradation for the country of 60,618 hectares, or approximately 1/50th of the deforestation and degradation were caused by forestry activities. This again dispels the notion that forestry activities are not being regulated, that they are not complying with sustainable forest management principles, and that there is rampant illegal logging. How can there be when the deforestation and degradation for the entire year is only 353 hectares? Logs harvested are stockpiled at approved sites in or near to forest location. And there is another misconception that if you see a big log pile, that it belongs to a Chinese investor. I don't know where people got this information from, but most log ponds or log sites, as we call them, you have more than one investor, more than one producer stockpiling there. For example, the one that was shown in the video, 14 concessionaires stockpile logs there. Not one, 14. And that will be shown in a later slide. Most stockpile sites are for multiple users, and trucking is done at night, not because they are stealing wood or they are thieves in the night, but simply for logistical reasons. Simply because there is less traffic and because there is less wear and tear on the vehicles. This map shows the concession site at Bisaruni log yard, and 14 concessionaires, the points in yellow, 14 concessionaires utilize that site, not one concessionaire. Please ensure you get a good shot of it. Let's go back now to the annual allowable cut. The annual allowable cut for the entire country is approximately 1.6 million cubic meters per year. The sector is currently harvesting at 30 to 35% of this. And we want to make a point, people were also reporting that so many containers were passing in an area in a particular period. If all the production of 450,000 cubic meters in a year was exported as logs, that would be equivalent to 25,000 containers of logs, and that would be equivalent to 68.5 containers, 40-foot containers, every single day of the year. Right? Just to put it in perspective. Numerous engagements were held with the sector to encourage more beneficial occupation of allocated state forests because the board, the GFC, and the government has serious concerns that areas are not being beneficially utilized. And we have taken actions including repossession of several foreign PSAs and WCLs, such as CRL, Carbon Resources Limited, Yonamco, Case Timbers, etc. This here shows the production for last year. Sorry. Last year. Not January. Not January. Sorry. Production for 2030. Showing here that the total annual allowable cut on the sustainable management principles is 1.6 million cubic meters, but the actual production last year was just under 400,000 cubic meters. This is obviously of great concern, not only to the GFC and the board and the government, but also to producers themselves, because they have invested in the forestry sector. So, what have we done? We met with forestry stakeholders And at these engagements, the Forest Producers Association and forestry stakeholders, especially community forestry associations, highlighted their inadequate capacity to produce because they did not have the finances, they did not have the machinery, equipment, etc. They, the FPA and the forestry stakeholders, requested that short-term measures be facilitated. The first one, GFC to allow joint venture arrangements after the requisite due diligence was done. And secondly, GFC to allow companies that lack adequate or appropriate machinery to rent from third parties. And based on these requests by the sector, the need to improve the log and lumber value, added value production and generate additional employment opportunities, these requests were approved. Stakeholders agreed that the procedure for the review of joint venture requests would be as follows. And it's outlined here. The justification must be made by the company that has legal access to the state forest. An assessment will be done. The GFC Technical Subcommittee will then conduct its review and make a recommendation to the full Board of Directors, which will then make a final decision on whether to approve or disapprove the joint venture. For the rental of machinery, a template was also prepared to capture information. And companies wishing to rent machinery would submit same to the GFC for rent review and approval prior to the machinery being formally accessed. Several companies have taken advantage of this facility by the GFC board and have approved joint venture or rental agreements. This has resulted in an increase in production. Important to note is that even with these joint ventures and rental agreements, there is still tremendous room for increasing the annual allowable cut within the sustainable limits. Let's look at processing and added value. GFC, in collaboration with the sector, has prepared a code of practice for processing, and this is being implemented in a phased manner. Currently, there are 181 licensed sawmills, and that is compared to 142 for the same period last year. Manufacture of added value forest produce has also increased, but not to the extent that we would like it to happen, or not fast enough. What will the GFC continue to do? We will continue to promote the development of added value activities, especially through training and demonstration activities. Only recently the GFC was able to acquire some funding through ITQ, I think it was, to assist a community with movement into the value-added dimension. The Forest Products Development Marketing Council and the GFC actively promote the use of the lesser known or lesser used species. And many of the species previously labeled as lesser used species, for example, Wamara. Wamara a couple of years ago, nobody was cutting it. And was deemed a lesser used species. It was not harvested. Now it's in the gun. This is simply because of the promotion that was being done. But having said that, a lot of these species which are being promoted also have difficulties because of their silica content or their high density and other factors. They are very difficult to process, and the recovery rates are very low. I read in the papers, and it's very true, very factual. Someone from the Community Forestry Association commented that recovery of Wamara is just about 20%. Recovery of locust is also about 20%. So you have to take these factors into consideration when talking about value added. The cost, so because of this, producers find it much more profitable to export logs rather than process lumber. The cost of appropriate skills machinery to process these species and their limited abundance in the forest continues to make it currently uneconomical to process these species locally. This is not to say that some of the other species cannot be processed, and we would certainly like to see that happening. In a continued effort to encourage more value adding, a national consultation was held in 2009 to look at a mechanism to reduce log exports. So log exports is nothing new, and it's not that GFC and the government has not tried to reduce them. And we had proposed at that consultation that there be a complete ban on log exports. But the stakeholders themselves said no, that will not be acceptable to us and will not be beneficial to us. So we don't want a complete ban. What we would rather prefer is a graduated increase in the export commission. And that has been a trend since 2009. I think for the prime species, the export commission is now 17%, and it will be increased shortly to 20%. Again, based on a request by a manufacturing stakeholder group, the log export of crabwood and locust logs was restricted because they made the representation that they were not getting enough of these species. The government of Guyana approved a restriction of these species. But then we noticed that there was no corresponding increase in the amount of value-added production from these two species. So the ones that were being short-trained were the producers, because they had these quantities of locust and crabwood in their forest, but could not export it and could not harvest it because no one was buying it. So then the GFC has put another mechanism in place approved by the board that these species have to be advertised locally, so that local manufacturers have the first opportunity to purchase them if they so desire. And after a period of time, I think it's 1 week, after 1 week has elapsed, and there's been no offer or no offer matching the price that they are requiring, then they are free to export them in accordance with the GFC guidelines. All other species approved for harvesting can be exported in log form in compliance with the national log export policy. All produce has to be exported has to be declared to the GFC. The produce has to be first inspected by a company grader and then verified by the GFC, and the required form is completed. The produce is inspected at the GFC approved inspection site, which can be in a forest area. And again, you can have multiple users of a particular inspection site. Consistency checks verify the grade and species, and I want to emphasize that GFC does not recognize any species to export as mixed hardwood. It must be listed by species, by individual species. Export is allowed only when it is verified that all is compliant with the required standards. And second and third levels of checks are done on state forest allocations, the pre-harvest inventory, compliance with the code of practice, compliance with processing and export of forest products. Independent auditors have verified that GFC has very functional and robust systems to monitor compliance and address any breaches. We also recognize that compliance can only be achieved by ensuring that stakeholders are appropriately educated and trained. And the Forestry Training Center, the Basic Needs Trust Fund, and the GFC provide comprehensive training for the sector. Involvement in policy formulation has also been an important aspect where communities and forestry stakeholders contribute to the formulation of policy. And it is important to note that both large and small groups benefit from state forest allocation. And Guyana has one of the most successful community forestry programs globally. We currently have 70 community forestry associations which have access to 484,000 hectares and provide direct employment for about 3,000 persons. That brings me to the end of the first presentation, and I would now like to go quickly into the second one, which deals with some misconceptions and setting the facts straight. Joint ventures. Joint ventures that Bai Shan Lin have been involved in. Actually, prior to the New Forest Act of 2009, there was no requirement for companies to seek GFC approval prior to entering into joint ventures or transfers. And Wamara was subject to a joint venture arrangement between Danny Chan and the original owner, Mr. Roy Carey. Danny Chan had previously held the concession Jarek Forest Industries. In July 2007, Danny Chan transferred all of the shares in Wamara and Carbon Sawmills to Mr. Chu Menzi of BSL. This was not something restricted to Danny Chan and Bai Shan Lin alone, because other joint ventures which occurred around the same time involved William Timbers and Nagasar Saw Limited. We come now to board-approved joint ventures. The Wood Associated Industries Company, of which the principal was Mr. Danny Amrani. A joint venture was approved in April 2009 with Bai Shan Lin. Shorewood Forest Inc., the principals were Dr. Patrick Williams, Dr. Gary Clark, and Ms. Yvonne Bell. A joint venture was approved in 2009 with Bai Shan Lin again. Parodi Woods Inc., Mr. Morbir Singh, Dinesh Singh, and Satya Singh. A joint venture was approved in March 2014 with Mr. Chu Hongbo. And Kwakwani Wood Products Inc., Mr. Yakub Ali and Mr. Ram Ali. A joint venture was approved in April 2014. All of these went through the full procedure of an application being made to the GFC, GFC reviewing it, going to the technical subcommittee of the board, then to the full board, and then being approved. Bai Shan Lin has legal access to a total of 627,000 hectares, not 960,000 hectares as has been erroneously reported in the print media. Of these, 345,000 approximately are state forest exploratory permits. They have to complete an ESIA, a forest inventory, and a business plan to the satisfaction of the EPA and GFC before these are recommended for conversion to a TSA. The President will have to sign the TSA document. It is noteworthy that limited harvesting in accordance with the Forest Act can be carried out in the SFEP, and this is with GFC approval. 274,000 hectares have been issued as TSAs under the joint venture agreements, Waiko, Wamara, Parodi, and Kwakwani, and 8,170 have been issued as state forest permission. This is a summary of the concessions that have been issued to Bai Shan Lin and joint venture partners, and as I said, a printout will be provided to you, or I think that this can see well. Now, again, there were rumors in the papers that Bai Shan Lin is over-harvesting. This is the actual picture. GFC monitors very, very effectively and very efficiently. And a log or a piece of lumber is not something you can hide in your pocket. Right? There's something that can be traced back to the origin. It's not like gold or diamonds or anything like that. So this shows clearly that Bai Shan Lin, last column on the right, Bai Shan Lin has unutilized quota in many of these concessions for 2014. And for 2013, it also has unutilized quota in many of the concessions. So the notion that Bai Shan Lin is overharvesting and clear filling and things like that is absolutely untrue and false. Then we see there were some media claims and pictures. The national log policy in 2009 reflects a progressively higher rate of export commission, but it does not prohibit the exploitation of logs, including crabwood and locust. There is no ban on the export of crabwood and locust, just a restriction. And once you go through the procedure, then you can have them exported. Important to note is the rates of export commission, currently at 17%, are among the highest in the world. And this was something that was recommended by stakeholders. GFC wanted and government of Guyana wanted a complete ban on log export. The pictures there show several Bai Shan Lin trucks left parked on one of the trails in Kwakwani and one of the graders. Logs harvested within the approved areas in 2012 and 2013. These are the logs on the log trucks. Central storage of logs is recommended by sustainable forestry management practices. And logging trucks usually park along the roadside during rainfall until the road is reasonably dry before continuing their journey. Anyone who is familiar with the forestry and forestry operations, this is going to be absolutely no surprise to them. This is normal forestry practice. Excavators and dump trucks in operation. Several heavy-duty equipment line the trail. The facts are, these are approved campsites and road networks. When you do your annual operational plan, you have to show where you're going to push roads for the next year or next years. So these roads are all approved, and your campsites have to be approved also by GFC. And these are standard requirements for any forestry operation. The presence of logging equipment is not evidence of SFM not being practiced. Rather, the presence of appropriate equipment is evidence that SFM is being practiced. Log piles along the trail. One of these logs is in excess of 4 feet in diameter. Bai Shan Lin's laden trucks. I think all of us should be happy if we can get logs 4 feet in diameter and more. Mr. Biden would be happy. So I see that as a plus, you know, certainly not cutting on the side logs. These pictures from different locations cannot be tied to any operation unless it is your reference. Bai Shan Lin, as they are the company under scrutiny, they are not the only operator in the forestry sector. So we can't assume that every time you see a log on the ground, that it belongs to Bai Shan Lin. I mean, I don't see a logic in it. And not because you see a log on a log pond, it belongs to Bai Shan Lin. I already said that many operators, at least only 14 people, utilize the log pond. The GFC monitoring system is spread across the country with 39 fixed forest stations and 10 mobile stations. And they are geared to establish the source and legality of logs in any location. Storage of logs is not testimony of the forest being harvested unsustainably. Storage of logs is something good, because you store logs and then at one point the truck comes and takes away a consolidated load. You don't want a truck to be moving 2 piles a day. That is going to cause damage to the road. So you consolidate the load and then you move it at one time. Log piles harvested and ordered home. This one here, the claim was that Bai Shan Lin has left logs all over the place. These logs piles are harvested by and owned by the local concession holders and community loggers association, and not by Shan Lin. These are stockpiles along the Kwakwani Aichuni Road and are the produce of the Aichuni Loggers Association, etc. And this can be proven by the log tags that are on it. You can trace back the log tag to the concessionaire who it was given to. This is the one where I was telling you that more than one person operates here. Thousands of exotic, expensive Wamara and Purple Heart logs at the Kwakwani site. This is a general look and appearance of how a log market should be. Logs are stockpiled by more than one concession holder at one central area at different points. So each different set of logs will belong to different concession holders. And these names listed here are some of the concessionaire holders who operated in the log depot in 2013 and in 2014. Again, these are not Bai Shan Lin's logs. These are stockpiles along the Kwakwani Aichuni Road showing forest produce harvested by the Region 10 Association. Loading of containers is approved at approved log sites. Before they are loaded, the logs are graded and approved for export. So Gfc process is, and the consistency checks are thoroughly done. Gfc stamp logs awaiting pickup by Bai Shan Lin. A stockpile of logs following harvesting. Stockpiling is a standard practice at the log market, and stockpiling at the central point does not verify the claim that these came from exploited forests. There is no evidence shown in any of these photographs to show that there has been a breach of sustainable forest management practices. If anyone claims that, it shows clearly that they are not familiar with forestry operation. Now, this was also a very ridiculous statement because the boat in question does not belong to Bai Shan Lin. The boat does not belong to Bai Shan Lin. And it's not Bai Shan Lin operator. And important to note also, I don't know what is the problem with a boat being used because we hear complaints about trucks damaging the road. In this operation, the boat is being used to bring the logs around the east bank by using waterways and not the roadways. So this should be something that should be praised by the media and not ridiculed. Local squares. Some of the locals put ready for shipment to China while local demand is being ignored. As I mentioned before, based on requests by manufacturers, the government of Guyana restricted the export of locust and crabo logs. But did that result in an increase in added value? No, it did not result in an increase. So we have to allow the producers again to export the log because they are paying liquid fees. So they have the right to take produce from the concession and make a profit out of it. Therefore, what we have done, they have a mechanism in place where they advertise the produce for 1 week, and then if no one opposes them to buy it, and buy it at a fair price, then they have all right to sell it in accordance with the GFC procedure. Containers about the lead, two trucks belonging to Bai Shan Lin about the lead Kwakwani inventory, in addition to the numerous that received from this publication witnessed heading to Georgia. But I don't know what is the issue with this, because the logs have to be transported either by boat or by truck, and they are perfectly legal logs that are being transported. Logs which have been harvested in keeping with the GFC guidelines, logs which have been verified by forestry officers in transit as being perfectly legal. This one here, I think it was only recently that Bai Shan Lin burns thousands of abandoned logs in Essequibo. These logs came from Kibana wood products, and at the time when these logs were cut, Bai Shan Lin did not have a joint venture with the company Kwakwani wood products. What Bai Shan Lin had was a rental agreement. These logs were cut for Barama. They are feeder species, Baramali mainly, and they were cut for Barama. Because of the state of the Kwakwani road, they could not have been transported. They were left at a location here until the road was repaired. And if you know of the species Baramali, it is easily infested. It is easily infested by termites. So when Barama finally got to inspect the logs, they rejected the logs because they were all with wormholes, etc. They could not be used for plywood manufacturing. Kibana wood products then approached GFC, and we gave them permission to cut up the Baramali into form molds. And you're seeing form molds here in the picture. These are some of the form molds that were cut from the logs. Unfortunately, on the 27th of April 2014, Kibana Woods reported to the GFC that someone had torched or burned some of the logs. And we are currently investigating that matter to find out more in detail. And once we find out who the perpetrators were, obviously we will take action, because this is something that we view as very, very serious. Thank you very much. That brings me to the end of my presentation. I will now invite the GFC team to come forward, and we'll be only too happy to clear up any further misconceptions or additional questions that you may have. But I'm pretty sure that after the presentation,
and the FTDMC are accurate.
Thank you very much, Robert, for that question. We would like to state categorically that the information supplied to ITCO, as well as the information provided in the Ministry of Finance, are accurate, which summarized that plywood and veneer exports increased by, production increased by 65 and 71% respectively. And the total increase in export earnings for the country was by approximately 30%. So there was a 30% increase in total export earnings for the first 6 months of this year compared to the first 6 months of last year.
So the ITC stated that there was a 8% increase in exports last backward.
The exact figure is 79.3%, that's right.
And Mr. Joseph Harmon has accepted an invitation by the Commissioner for a debate, but has asked that some another document be released. The GFC prepared to release the document.
My officers told me that correspondence was sent. I haven't had time to look at that, so I reviewed it. I finished the meeting.
Vice President has been in Ghana since 2010, and officials, including the Minister of Minister of National Resources, have said that there will be no large-scale export of logs by the company, but the company has been exporting logs on large scale and has yet to set up enforcement plans. Why hasn't the Gfc Press Conference to set up the plans sooner?
I think that there was a statement in the papers recently where Vaidana stated quite clearly that it was waiting on certain things to be fulfilled first, design, etc., and also they have ordered equipment to come. Now, also, we need to clarify this. A company coming into Guyana and going into the forest harvesting cannot be expected to start to produce large-scale sawmill quantities and so on. The company has to do inventory, has to do an annual operational plan, has to do a forest management plan, all these things before operations are started. And only then they will know the volume of species and the type of species that are there. And they have to bring in sawmills and so on, which are appropriate to for those species. So the notion that they will come and go to a concession and immediately bring in a sawmill, we have to dispel that notion. But Bai Shan Lin has shown us, and they've shown the media, that they have the intention of setting up a sawmill by this year.
When Bai Shan Lin came in, they had immediate access to a TSA, which we would have expected that all these things would have been done. Then what that would have been available to them.
So that was not. That is one of the reasons why the concession was taken away from CRL. Because CRL had a concession for several years and did not do the requisite inventory and management plans and operational plans that they were supposed to do. So when Bai Shan Lin came in, they basically had to start from scratch.
No, so when did they start exporting from that TSA?
I hear there's me call.
I can't say offhand, but they would not have been restricted in exporting from that concession. Once they exported in accordance with the national law policy.
And could you give a number as to how much people the GFC has on the ground, for example, forest rangers and so on, doing monitoring and checking and so on? The number, not the number of stations, the number of personnel.
220. 220. Each large concession has resident forest officers, at least one.
Recently, I visited the Bai Shan Lin concession at Unikiru, but I noticed that a number of lots had GFC tags in them, some of which were faded, and also there were some lots that the official there told me had been there for over a year and they were rotting. What happens? How is this allowed to happen?
Can you repeat this?
Logs that have been cut and are left there and are allowed to rot.
Left where?
And at Bai Shan Lin, Unikiru. Also, the tags that the GFC has in them are faded and you can't see anything, you can't make out anything. How do you account for all of these if you have to check them?
I think those are the logs that are being called in CRL, the whole logs, very old logs.
No, the official who spoke to me there said it was there for a year that they were supposed to export, but then there was no market.
Official from here? Bai Shan Lin?
Alright, at their location in Peru, we have 2 resident forest officers at that location. We check every day all the logs coming in and going out from the location. Like any business plan, the company operation is first of all approved by the GFC. The company may have intention by way of producing to satisfy a particular market. If by chance that market is no longer available, the company is in the process of finding other markets. During the process, I must mention, at the time these logs reach the location, the officer will verify that these logs are legal and assess them for the payments of royalty. So of course, for all those old logs that we notice at the location, these logs, the company would have paid royalty for those logs. And then we give the company a window period. Of course, there's no deadline on any company to utilize the logs, but then when we recognize that the logs start to deteriorate, we will call the company and say, well, what's your plan for the utilization of these logs? And then we continue to monitor to make sure that the log market that continue to be stopped when you have logs which are not being utilized. Some of these logs at the location, the company also expressed to the GFC that at the completion of the sawmilling operation, because of the state of the log, it will only be profitable for them to process right here because no one wants to buy those logs anymore and try to recover as much as possible. So again, all of this is in pipeline, in addressing, but at the end of the day, they are not logs which are legally sourced. And secondly, the GFC also receive royalties for those logs.
All right, I was wondering, Mr. Sutherland, if you don't mind, could we move around the floor a bit? And there's supposed to be a mic somewhere in the room. And there's a second one. If I could just have it move around, because I don't think it... Warren, could you move around with the mic a little bit for me, please? I don't think everyone is having the opportunity to hear the questions that are being asked. So, Mr. Sutherland, I know you have quite a bit. Could we move around and we'll come back? Thanks.
Larry, thanks for your views. Just a quick follow-up from Robert Sutherland's question.
What is a reasonable time frame before somebody, a company or whoever has been granted permission to move straight into value-added processing?
It will depend on the size of the concession, the type of species, the species mix that they have and so on. But I would say maybe 2 years.
2 years. We have a number of questions. Obviously, Kaicha News would have been the one that's been accused of carrying on the reports. We have a number of questions for the sake of clarity. We want for this issue to arrest. And we were asking that we be accommodated to ask questions, maybe a couple of them. I know that you guys are very busy, but we were asking that we be allowed to ask those questions and hopefully have them answered so we can get this over with. I don't know, I'm going to move straight into the I would be allowed.
That's not a problem, it's just that we're trying to ensure an equal balance.
So do we go back or then?
No, you could take a few, Mr. Sutherland.
Could you explain to us what the situation is with Bai Shan Lin, how long they've been here, and whether they're involved with the process? We've been told that they've been here for over a decade, but they have not moved in. You said 2 years, Mr. Singh, but have they moved into the value-added process? Because the question is, what is exactly our policy with regards to value-added and log export as the situation with Bai Shan Lin?
Okay. Jarek, and I will
Sure.
in the same breath address Garner. These are two companies which are owned by China Resources. Okay. And you are correct, we are very, very concerned about the state of operations in these two companies. In all fairness to Jarek, the company has an abundance of feeder species, and you know that Rama was not buying feeder species for quite some time because of the market prices.
Excuse me, Mr. Singh, could you please use the microphone? Because it's affecting the record here because of a lack of audio.
We have a series of, which is why
One more
we had that
microphone,
one.
no. Oh.
Yes. Hearing me now?
Better now?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, the Guyana Forestry Commission is very concerned about the operations of these two companies. Because as you have rightly said, we recognize that they have been here for quite some time. Only about 2 months ago, I called in the principal of both companies and told them that unless we see positive movement coming on this year, that GFC will be making a recommendation to the board for repossession of both TSCs.
But just a quick follow-up from that. You just said 2 years, but isn't that an inconsistency with it's been almost a decade now? How do you explain that?
Well, you have to realize that there are also, let's not look only at the foreign companies. There are also many local companies that have not been performing in the same rate. If you look at the local companies, hardly anyone, you have a few that are outstanding, but the majority are performing at about 20% and below that. So I don't think it's the intention of the government to go on a campaign to repossess all the TSCs in the country. I mean, that will not be something sensible to do. But what we have been doing, the last board of directors met with all of the companies, asked them to give a presentation as to what was their plan for the short term and medium term. And we are holding companies to that now. And if persons don't perform, then we are certainly going to throw the book at them. And it's the forest law. There's a process that you have to follow in taking back concession. You don't just wake up one morning and decide that you're going to take back concessions. Persons have made investments, and you have to find out the reasons as to why they're not performing. So it's not something that you can do overnight. But we have been meeting with companies, not only this year, in the past, not only the GFC, but the GFC board of directors and the minister as well. We have expressed concern to them. We can only hope that things will get better and that they will move into value-added operations.
What happens if a TSA is not performing? What does the GFC do in that particular case? Because I have a follow-up question to that.
We have to write them that indicate that they're not performance. Meet with them, find out what are the reasons. If we can assist them in bridging the gap, as the reason for the non-performance, we assess them. But if it's simply that some companies are speculating, hoping for joint ventures, hoping to sell the company out or so on, then we have to take even more drastic action.
Because my question then comes, a company or an individual or whatever entity comes in together, or they're locals, and they apply for a particular concession, and so the part where it's an SFPP, they have to show technical and financial capability, am I correct?
Yes.
Then all of a sudden these companies come back and they say they want to go and into the joint venture. Wouldn't that be a contradiction of the fact that in the first place they would show technical and financial capabilities?
I think it's a function of the business environment. Companies may have a lot of finances now, but because of bad investments in other business activities, they lose their finances, and then they have to. I know of one particular instance. One company asked for a joint venture because the company entered into a joint venture because they had markets short overseas. Then the financial impact of the financial crisis, where they lost all the markets, and they could no longer invest in the machinery and equipment that they were supposed to invest in. So then they
with Bai Shan Lin, and could we be provided as total inventory, and could you also say whether these vehicles, equipment, and so on were duty-free concessions, and is this an unusual case where one company would have been granted all these concessions before timber sales agreement permission will be granted?
I think that you have to direct your question to the GRA. I'm going to Does
GFC play any particular role in the granting of concessions? Would they have to endorse any application?
We will have to verify that a company has been granted an SFP or a TSA or an SFP. But that is your role.
Okay, hold for a minute.
Could you say if the GFC have copies of the FDI in arrangement between Bai Shan Lin and the cabinet? Could you say why you don't have the copy?
We don't normally have that.
Secondly, could you say why you ignored the recommendation in 2006 to hire an international specialist in tropical timber trade to devise a effective export tax in support in Guyana?
Good recommendation.
You ignored the recommendation.
Good recommendation.
Janitor plan.
Are you saying that I should take on board all?
No. It was part of a conservation stakeholder meeting you had, and you were.
I think I understand. Let me just say that Ms. Gorkan was present at the consultation. And I don't recall her saying a word at the consult. So I don't know where the recommendation came from. But she certainly did not make a recommendation to the Forestry Commission. It's the first time I hear it. First time. But she had the opportunity to make all her comments at the consultation, and I don't think she authored the word.
Kiana Mubarak News. I just wanted a quick clarification before my question. You said prior to 2013, Wamara wood was not being harvested?
Not being harvested?
Yes. What, could you just clarify
I
that?
It was deemed a lesser used species.
It was deemed a lesser used species. Okay. The clarification there. There are claims that the company Bai Shan Lin does not have a logging license, therefore it should not be extracting to the extent it probably is. Could you say for the current permit that they have, what exactly is the amount they're allowed to take? Is there any specific number for that limited amount they're allowed to extract?
Yes, sir. In the presentation, I outlined that is an annual quota and an annual allowable fund. And I also gave the calculation, the formula that is used there.
Yes, you gave the formula. I'm asking you about there's the difference with the permit and there's the license. There's a certain amount for...
Oh. All right.
Can I ask a question for some clarification? Are you trying to find out what it is they can do with the SFEP, or are you trying to find out what it is they can do with the joint venture arrangement?
No, I'm not asking about the joint venture. I'm asking about the SFEP.
Oh, okay. And the question now is?
The question now is, what is it that they're allowed to do? You said that there's a limited amount. Okay. So I'm just trying to find out the specifics in that regard.
Sure, no problem. And first that, as we've been saying for the last week or so, it allows for the holders of SFEPs to be able to harvest a maximum of 25% of their expenses, provided that the regulation does not give a lower figure, and the regulations don't. So, and it doesn't include their capital, which is your initial investment. It doesn't include that. It includes the cost which you would spend to go into the area to carry out the exploratory work. You're allowed to harvest to recover 25, a maximum 25%.
I just wanted to say something additional. When the forest law was being debated in Parliament, we had a parliamentary subcommittee to debate that law. This was not in there. But the parliamentary subcommittee, in their wisdom, said that it was not fair for someone to invest all that money in an exploratory area and then probably find at the end of it all that the area was not suitable for forestry operations. But they put that inside. This is not the GFC. This is the parliamentary subcommittee that dealt with the forest law.
Right. If I could even backtrack a little further. Prior to the 2009 Act coming into effect, the SFEP, you were not allowed to carry out any harvesting whatsoever. And that was deemed by the parliamentary subcommittee to be a bit unfair because, one, there was no guarantee that you were going to get a TSA at the end of the process. Two, there was also no guarantee that the area would be stocked with whatever it is you were looking for to carry on your business. So they felt it that you should allow them to do some limited amount of harvesting so that they can recover something, and it also gets them in the practice of seeing how the business would operate should they get the TSA and move forward and so forth. So I'm not sure if that would answer your question in its entirety. Maybe I'll take Mr. Sutherland again. I know you had a few more, and I had 3 pictures. Okay, fine. That's all right. You can finish.
I have about four more, so
let's try to share it around. Yes, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Commissioner, you indicated that you can't recall exactly when Bai Shan Lin started exporting logs. Actually, I'm a bit surprised at that statement because a number of your officers here have been in the GFC for over 4 years. So, does anyone else know when they started?
If I may, I think what the commission said was that offhand. I didn't think he said that we don't know. He just said offhand because that was not something that we came prepared for per se. So what he's saying is offhand, he wouldn't be able to tell you exactly when, but if we are afforded some time, we could get that information.
So none of the other officers know either?
I'm pretty sure you already reviewed and you did your research as it relates to the commencement of the Bai Shan Lin operation. But let's say from the commencement of the operation. But one thing I want to note here is that the company is not operating to the full allowance as it relates to the annual allowable fund. That's one. And secondly, is that the company is also involved in a lot of local sales of logs, especially to the sawmills in the periphery area. And if you wish the figures in terms of percentage, I will say approximately about 40% of what the company produces, despite they're not reaching their full quota, they've been reselling, well, they've been selling those, and they're sold, and the records can show, they've been supplying sawmills along the corrugated area.
But you don't know when they started exporting.
If you want the exact date, I can go back into the record and bring the exact date to you in a later date. But I can't give you the real month and so on. But when the company commences operation, obviously they start producing logs. But then they will not sell logs if they commence operation in January, because they have to truck it out, they have to prepare it, they have to do so many things. So if they commence the operation in January, give it about 4 months, and then they will start to look at sale for to produce at the harvest.
I don't think that we have any problem in disposing information. It's just that we don't have the data right now. At our disposal, we can provide the new stuff.
Sure, that would be very helpful. Secondly, could you give a breakdown of how much Bai Shan Lin and Bai Shan individually, separately, have been exporting on an annual basis up to this year?
Do we have that for containers?
We would recognize that we won't have this figures available at our disposal right away, but we can provide them to you by tomorrow.
So can I call you tomorrow and get it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Commissioner, recently you told the Parliamentary Sectoral Committee on Natural Resources about Bai Shan Lin has been issued 2 SFEPs which cover 340,000 hectares of forest. According to the EPA, 2 SFEPs were issued to Bai Shan Lin. SFEP 01 of 2011 was awarded in November 2011 and covers areas A and B in region 6 and 9. And these 2 areas, as well as the SFEP 01 of 2013, which was awarded in April 2013. Both of these add up to 134,360 hectares, which is not the figure, there's not 345,000. But if you add the Sherwood Forest SFEP, which is 167 and 66 hectares, these would add up to 382 hectares of forest. Can you account for the remainder of the 43,618 hectares of forest? And is this a 3rd or 4th SFEP?
Okay, Bai Shan Lin has been issued SFEP 01 2013. The area size is 73,015. SFEP 01 2013. 73,015 hectares. SFEP 01 2011, 104,768. And Sherwood Forest Inc. SFEP 01 2007, 167,066 hectares. I'm not sure how much that adds up to. 344,849.
So the information given by EPA was inaccurate?
I cannot verify that information was given to you. All I can say is that this is the information, this is the accurate, because we are the one who awarded them the SFEP.
So these numbers are contained in Bai Shan Lin documents as well. So, okay,
this is the correct information.
Do we have any other questions?
Yes.
We're back to Kaitra, yes.
Okay, Rockcliffe Country News, good afternoon. In the first segment of Albert's question, Mr. Singh, you noted that you haven't had a chance to review Mr. Harmon's letter, but when you do so, you will give a response. But just preliminarily, would you be willing to provide Mr. Harmon with documents like the agreement between Bai Shan Lin and the GFC and the agreement between Bai Shan Lin and the Government of Guyana, as well as copies of all agreements between Bai Shan Lin and all the entities involved? Would there be, is there an inclination for you to do so?
I would like to leave it that I have to review the document first, and when I review it, then I will make a decision as to what we can provide and what we can't.
So at this point, you can't say if there's a likelihood of giving all these documents?
No, because I haven't seen this correspondence itself. I need to see the correspondence and review it.
Okay.
You would appreciate that.
Okay. it can be appreciated. Secondly, also in Mr. Goldberg's response to him, you said that each large concession has resident officers. Are there mechanisms in place to ensure these rangers remain professional, and is there a rotation on a regular basis?
Yes, I would refer you to the Deputy Commissioner in charge of that division, Mr. Bai.
Thank you for your question. As I always say, a system is not strong unless you have strong persons, or it depends on the person monitoring and managing the system. The fact is that we recognize at the GFC that, of course, that we have a number of power stations across the country. Often we rotate our offices maybe every 6 months or every year, based on their strength and also based on the need of different locations. That is one. Secondly, in the monitoring operation, and this is about rotating the offices. You know, offices staying in one location for a very long time, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, depends. You know, it might be on a case by case. If that officer maybe is a resident community forestry officer living in that particular location. Also to note here is that these officers, and the person will ask the question, what about if these officers are not doing what they're supposed to do on the ground? We have a system which is set up where the officers on the ground, they work. We have teams from Georgetown, and we have auditors within the monitoring network who will visit this location periodically, verify and re-examine back and audit back these officers' work. Look back at the report submissions, go back in the fields and see yes, if it's a cook report, there's a report that actually did work on the ground. So we have this kind of mechanism in place where we're not sitting in head office accepting reports, because we know that we have a system, and Commissioner mentioned about it, about independent forest monitoring, third-party auditing. We don't wait until the third-party auditors come to Diana and tell us that, you know what, we're not doing what we're supposed to do on the ground. We have our mechanism or our system set up that we constantly verify back our officers' work. And let's say, for example, you saw in one of the photographs, trucks coming out from Kwakwani in the night, Bai Shan Lin trucks. Let's use the same photograph. On the way coming to Georgetown, we have forest stations along the way. We have a forest station in Kwakwani. The officers in Kwakwani, they will finish work at 4:30, but periodically, without the knowing of the stakeholder, we will have impromptu patrols or checkpoints established. So one night they will come and see that we have a police officer with us, and every single truck coming out in the night from Kwakwani and Chuni, we stop them and check them. Just like the police have patrols in the night. And we also have a 24-hour station at Linden. We have a 24-hour station at Susan. And all of these trucks transporting in the night or day, they're required to stop at these stations. If they don't stop, there is a penalty. So again, I just want to establish a check and balance system in place. And the other thing I want to also say is that the boat service at Kwakwani, for example, is also between certain hours. So all of this as part of a monitoring network, as Commissioner mentioned, logs is something you can't hide. You can't put it in your pocket and run away. The fact is that our effort at the GFC is to make sure that we establish our check and balances at all the exit points coming out from the forest. If it's a waterway, we have a station there. If it's a by road network, we have a station set up there. At the end of the day is that we continue to rotate our staff and continue to recheck the system from time to time.
Thank you very much.
Before you go on this, there's something that I want to mention, and that is that you may have a few officers who may get involved in activities which we control from time to time. But the majority, the vast majority of the GFC staff are very professional officers, very hardworking, very dedicated, and very committed. And you know, this is not just something that I am saying. The stakeholders themselves have recognized that the staff are very, very professional and work beyond the call of duty. And you know, it is very demoralizing when staff have to read the misinformation that is being peddled in newspapers, and which casts aspersions as to their integrity and their commitment and so on. So, you know, we need to be very fair and very balanced in our reporting, and we need to recognize the hard work of the GFC officers. It is only because of the kind of sacrifices that they make that Guyana has a deforestation rate of less than 0.1%, even in the face of logging that has been going on for decades. So I just want to stress and emphasize that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very satisfying response. My final question, and this has two parts. Residents of Region 9 wrote the Commission since July about concessions supposedly given to Bai Shan Lin in that region. It was noted that this would affect the livelihood drastically of those Amerindians residing there. Can you shed some light on this situation, A? And B, can you tell me, I know Bai Shan Lin has claims in Kwakwani and Kamaka and Moblissa, but could you say exactly what are how many parts of Guyana Bai Shan Lin has claims? Concession, sorry. This information should have come out clearly in my presentation. Bai Shan Lin has a joint venture with Kwabana. So when the Amerindians were referring to Bai Shan Lin was given a concession in Kwabana, we clarified that this was an existing concession which was held by Mr. Yakubali and Mr. Ramani, and they entered into a joint venture with Bai Shan Lin. So it was no new concession that was given. The existing Kwabana producing is the one that they have access to. And I also mentioned that they have joint ventures with Waiko, Aymara and Prodi. Right? And as I said, you would have a printout which would elaborate on that. And there are maps and which also show the different we have absolutely nothing to hide.
Before we go back to you, Mr. Kaito News, do we have any other questions on this? Yes, Mr. Baino.
Sorry, Mr. Baino. Yeah, just 1 minute. The question you asked about livelihoods for the Amerindians and so on. This is something that we feel very strongly about, and that the ESIA is the perfect opportunity for persons, the Amerindians themselves, or persons advocating on behalf of the Amerindians, to bring out particular measures which they would like to see in place for the Amerindians to benefit even more. Okay? So,
is there a penalty in place if a logging company does not carry out the ESIA?
Once it's an area of 8,097 hectares and above, it has to be issued as an SFP. The only time it will not be issued as an SFP is if it's a reallocation of an existing TSA, which went through that SFP process. All right.
Yes, Mr. Baino. Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, before we go to Mr. Baino, I'm not sure which maybe I can use representative, but
Mr. Gerdere, don't worry, or Robert, don't worry. I wouldn't be asking anything too untoward. Mr. Commissioner, I was invited here along with several other stakeholders who small loggers, and I just need to seek clarification. Were we invited to just listen, or may we intervene by making a comment or asking a question?
The floor is open. We did dub this session a media session for questioning, but other entities were also invited. So that is why I've been throwing it out to the entire room if there are any questions. So it's not restricted only to the media to ask questions. The media gets... Hold on. Before we...
It was my understanding that it was
yes.
Are you on the star round?
Okay.
That's what the center stop complaining.
Okay. Yes, sir. And we're not... Please. There's no need for us to get in these sorts of exchanges. We all get our chances to ask questions. Mr. Baino, whoever else, they have burning questions similar to you.
Is it a press conference? Is it a press conference?
You will have an opportunity. I allowed Kaitru to go around like 5 times. Sir, okay. So what is the problem with the gentleman asking a question?
Of course, I represent the small loggers media house. I may not have been accredited.
Are you part of the process?
I may not have been accredited, but I represent a small number.
What is the problem with me?
Okay, all right.
It's going to be invited.
I'm sorry.
Invited. And they can have their say, but this is a press conference and you understand.
Actually, Mr. Commissioner, what I was going to do was to praise Kaichur News putting the spotlight on the logging industry. And
One second, please.
It's a press conference.
Mr. Bino, if I could ask you just to hold, we'll just let the press run its course, and when they're finished, we will then take questions from other entities, so that the press is at its conclusion with their questions. So will you hand the mic back to Kaichur News, please? Sorry, it was Mr. Yes.
Clarify whether or not the GFC has or had a policy that logs can only be exported by an exporter who will valid logging concession.
I'm sorry, I don't think I heard the question. Could you repeat it, please? It was a bit of noise.
Yes, can you clarify whether or not the GFC has or had a policy that logs can only be exported by an exporter holding a valid logging concession?
Yes, we had a policy that logs can only be exported from a concessionaire, and the logs must come from that particular concession. But the FPA has asked us to show some flexibility in that, and that we have been doing with justification.
How recently did this start?
How recently? A couple of years ago. A couple of years, but what the FPA has represented us is that no one concessionaire was able to accumulate sufficient logs to make a shipload. So they asked for consolidations of logs to be accommodated, and we agreed to that with the approval of GFC.
Okay, so just to further clarify, so now anyone can export?
Not anyone, you have to have justification. You have to have the justification, it has to go to the GFC board.
Okay. And you've spoken a lot about safeguards and so on, but in the last independent forest monitoring report, one of the things that was indicated was that 3 SFPs had exceeded their quota in 2010 and 2011 without having all of the excess volume deducted from their quota of 2012 and 2013. Although you've said
3
that...
SFPs or 3 SFPs?
3 SFPs. Although you've said that overall they're not even meeting the full quota, but this report shows that even though overall it's not happening at individual company levels, it is happening and they're exceeding their quota.
First of all, I want to say that we have about 500 SFPs, 507 SFPs. So from time to time you would see something. If 3 SFPs exceed their quota out of 507, I don't think the GFC can be branded as opening the floodgates and allowing things to happen. But I'm also pretty sure that there is a justification for the 3, and I will ask Pradeep or Tadrif to give the justification.
Thanks, Robert, for that question. Just to reiterate Commissioner's point, we have to date 507 state forest permissions. So the 3 which you would have mentioned would have been out of that 507. Colbert alluded to the fact of the independent forest monitoring assessment which was concluded. And that shows that for the majority, 95% of the principles, criteria, and indicators audited, that the GFC was very effective in ensuring those were successfully and effectively implemented. So Colbert, to speak to the exceeding of the quota for those 3 concessions, the very fact that we can ascertain that means that we have a system in place to monitor production and quota levels. Because we are the ones who provided that information to the IFM team. We were able to see, as Commissioner would have presented in his 2 presentations, the maximum quota level for every concession, and we reconcile every month how much comes in from each concession. So what we generate in a periodic basis is the status of production level for every one of those 500 concessions. So we know at any one point in time the production level out of the total maximum. So as soon as we see the level going close to 100, we pay keen attention to the number of tags we then issue to that concession. What happens, however, that in the space of a month, when you have, let's say they're at 95% capacity, in the next month they just might go over a bit over the 100%. What we do immediately as we see that, and it never exceeds more than 10% of the total that they're supposed to get, there is a stoppage in terms of the issuance of permits and tags to that concession. But what we can tell you, and I think this is one of the outstanding points of the system, is that we know the production level of every single concession. There are some concessions that have zero production. They're not producing anything, whereas there are some that are at half the productive capacity. And then there's a minority of them that are at the exceeding level. But we're able to monitor that by tracking every one of the concessions. And in doing so, providing the information to auditors when they come.
Just as an extension, apart from all the explanation there, and the reason why you may have a few cubic meters or a percentage going over the allowable cut. In the next calculation, or next coming year, for the future allocation, this will be taken into consideration and be deducted from the annual allowable cut. So it's not going to be like, okay, you over-harvest and next year you come and start work as normal again. It will be deducted so that we can have a balance off coming in next year.
According to the report, it said that all of the excess will be deducted from their next year's budget. Additionally, Ms. Buana, you spoke about the filing system, and the report also said the check of the database revealed the process of repeated breaches on tax stumps or improper tagging, and revealed also that some cases repeat offenders, stakeholders had not paid for full compensation. If your system is so robust, how come these things are still survived?
Thank you. Maybe I can say a bit, and then Catherine can also add. So the way in which we have, I'll answer the first part, Galbert, in terms of the quota level from previous years and the pattern being detected. So some SFPs have been 20 years, because once there is compliance in the given lease period, the SFP, once those compliance requirements are met, can be renewed to that same operator. If there is an exceeding of the quota, even in 2 lease periods before, that is a threat to sustainable forest management. Because we can make and take account of that in current and upcoming lease periods that are allocated. So in that way, as Tasrif would have mentioned, there is a balancing off of how much has been identified as an exceeding of the quota. Whatever minimal amount has been identified as an exceeding of the quota. Because SFPs work like that. They have a 2-year lease period, and then if they comply with the requirements that set out, we assess that at the end of that lease period and it's renewed. Even if it's not renewed to that same holder, when we renew it or issue it to a new applicant, then we start by the deducting of that excess quota in the new lease period. So because it's cyclical, we have the opportunity at any point in time of that cycle to take account of any excesses that would have been reported. The second matter, Albert, you mentioned in terms of the findings of the Independent Forest Monitoring Report, that we would have reported that in some instances for particular areas of operation, there would have been offenses being recorded. Perhaps let me just preface what I will say in a later part of my statement and what I'm sure Tasrif will say. That the way that IFM works, Independent Forest Monitoring, we've had 2 annual audits to date. The systems that are in place is that their principal criteria and indicators outlined. We present and open all of our systems up for scrutiny, and they can ask to see anything and ask to see any part of our system. So the way in which they're able to tell that is by looking at what we have recorded as breaches, as offenses, and as procedural infractions. So we present this information to the auditors. We are frank in letting them know this is what the state of the sector is, and this is what we've recorded as the main offenses over the past year or 2 years. It's an open book. And they can ask us anything, and if we refuse to give anything to them, they must also record that in the report. And I'm certain you will see, and I'm sure you would have had a close look at the report, there is not a single statement by the IFM auditors that we've withheld any part of our database or our system or the field checks from them coming and opening up the scrutiny. So I think that by itself should give some credibility to the fact that in these audits, which we have conducted, as I mentioned, for 2 years now, we are an open book. They can check anything. There are certain offenses that have been listed by the IFM report, which I guess would have been informed by our database, that speaks to repeated offense. What we've laid out to the auditors, and the log tracking is one of those instances when we have, because of the process of reconciliation, there might have overlaps in cases when we would have reconciled in the upcoming month for tag utilization, which would not have been entered as yet in the previous month, because we do have to give allowance for data processing time. One of the recommendations of the auditors is that we should have a more real-time system of recording tag use and tag allocation. And that is the point they have been making, and they have made in the last report, to allow for there to be more frequent updating of our system in our production databases. And you would see that we have responded to that by accepting that as a corrective action, and by stating that we're putting systems in place to allow for more real-time recording. It may not be able to be done every day, but maybe every fortnight for the large operators. So we do acknowledge we are not one to say that all of the systems are perfect. All of the systems are perfect. Certainly there is room for improvement, and there should always be room for improvement in the main core aspects of our system. And I think it is expected that as GFC staff, we should acknowledge the areas that need to be improved and work hard to ensure those get strengthened as we move along.
Mr. Singh, you mentioned that there are 220 forest rangers, I think. Are you saying that the GFC has adequate personnel, that 220 is adequate personnel to effectively manage forest in Guyana?
The 220 may not be fully adequate, but it's sufficient. It's sufficient. It is never adequate, because from time to time, persons will leave and we have to recruit new staff, etc., and train them and so on. But for the purposes of ensuring legality, ensuring that persons comply and so on, the system is working, it's functioning. So we're satisfied.
Referring you back to a photo that was there with the trucks and the logs, I think you said some of the trucks can be there for 1 year. Is that correct?
The logs.
No, the trucks that were lined up with logs. You said it isn't an anomaly, because sometimes they have to wait there on the rainy season.
Well, not 1 year.
I have. How long are they there on trucks?
No, I'm talking about the intermittent shower. You have to wait until the road dries off, then it's 1 day.
Oh, well, that clears that up. Next question. In summation, can you say pointedly, does the GFC believe, after its analysis of both Bai Shan Lin and Bai Tana over the years that they've been here, can you say that so far they have not had any infractions with the GFC and or with any infractions pertaining to their legal contractual obligations thus far?
What I can say is that both companies have had infractions, but mainly procedural infractions, right? Not anything very significant damage to the environment or anything like that. I should let you know that Bai Shan Lin, when they first came into the country, their operations were suspended. They were suspended for about 2 years because we were told all sorts of stories about this company, and we investigated. That investigation was requested by the president, the then president, Bai Shan Lin. And we did a thorough investigation of the company, and only when we were satisfied that everything was above board, then we released the operation. That was after maybe, I can't remember exactly how long, but it was more than a year we were suspended for. Bai Tana has committed some minor infractions, nothing environmental or anything of that sort, mainly procedural. It may be something log tagging not properly put on the stump or something like that. But it's certainly not anything of a nature that would cause serious concern. and certainly not anything that would compromise the sustainability of the forest resources.
And to add, all infractions are treated across the board in the same manner in terms of very strict policies under the Forest Act. So there is no preferential treatment in terms of how we administer fines and those sorts of things. The Act is very clear and we follow it to the letter.
You have a list of these infractions in your file, on file.
You mean the two companies?
2 companies.
Yes.
Are you willing to provide that information on what they have?
You mean the procedural penalties?
What penalties have been meted out so far? And
Well,
what?
I think I direct that question to the commissioner because I'm a stickler for what is in the letter of the law. So I would ask you to write him and wait the requisite period. But I don't know if you would.
Mr. Singh, what safeguards are in place? Specific safeguards are in place to ensure that species that should not be exported are not exported. Because I know going through, looking through the actual inventory and all that can be time consuming. What safeguards are there?
Every single log that is exported has to be verified. Every single log. The logs are first graded by the company's grader. Then the GFC verifies that the grade and the species is correct, and only then it is exported. As I said, the only restriction that we have is on crabwood and locust. It's not a ban. They can be exported once the proper procedure is followed.
A quick follow-up. You got me right here. You said it was 1 week they had to advertise.
Yes.
Through which medium?
They will advertise through the FBA, through the FPDMC, and in the print media.
Okay. In the classified section?
No. We have to put a very prominent advertisement in the papers.
Prominent?
Yes.
Okay.
It's actually well displayed.
And my final question. I can't really see any of the stuff. Thus far, after the analysis of the operations of both Bai Shan Lin and Bai Shan Lin, do you believe, sir, does the GFC believe that the two companies will live up to promises that they will establish log processing plants here?
Certainly. We've already seen developments in Linden, in Conception, where the site has been cleared and work has started and preparing the foundation. And we've already seen work in the Wood Industrial Park near to by the stadium by Providence. And by then, I mean, it was public knowledge. It was put in the papers that they have advertised for, that they have procured this equipment, and the receipts and everything were submitted in the information provided to all the newspapers.
Mr. Singh, could you, does the checking system include Kano, GRA, customs, and what else? I'm just asking.
Yeah, the GFC export procedures. Our function is to ensure that what is declared for export actually goes into the container. Once that is done, our responsibility stops with it. But we also collaborate very actively with Kano and with customs.
And all this is, are there cases where these containers have been sealed in the back dam?
I'm Nigel Bolton, the Journal Auditor. Invariably, what happens is containers are sealed with the customs seal that would have to be affixed by the customs officer. But in the absence of the customs officer, the containers are brought out with the shipping line seal, and they are re-inspected with the trucks, stop at the forest stations. If those containers are not sealed, they are rechecked by the forest officers along the way. A container has a weight limit, right? So even after all those checks are done, we still check the content ship report to ensure that the container had the weight for the volume that was declared. Right? So there's no way once the weights are correct that we can't reconcile the balances in terms of the amount that was declared for export. And of course, we would check back, our auditing system would check back to see that they paid the correct commission for export.
Commissioner, the Cubana concession, is the GFC still considering the Cubana concession as a joint venture?
As a joint venture?
Yes, sir.
Yes, as far as we are aware on our books, it's a joint venture.
Then, sir, could you tell us the role of, is the name Mr. Ram Ali the same person as Mr. Ramzan Roshan Ali as in the Consul General of Florida for Guyana, the diplomat?
That's right.
Could you tell us the role that Mr. Ramzan Ali would have played in this entire joint venture with Guyana?
When Mr. Yaqub, when the concession was first given to Mr. Yaqub Ali, Mr. Yaqub Ali then approached the GFC and said that because of need for equipment and financing and so to carry out the operations, he wanted to engage a joint venture partner. He identified that joint venture partner as Mr. Ram Ali. I'm not sure if he was the Consul General at that time. I don't think so. I don't think he was, I'm not sure. Yeah. And Mr. Ram Ali had many outlets, foreign outlets overseas. And so the GFC saw absolutely nothing in that because he was a person who was engaging in value adding, wanting to get into the joint venture. So it was approved by the GFC board. However, after the financial crisis, Mr. Ram Ali then approached the GFC again and said, look, I'm not getting any markets, all my markets have collapsed, and I'm not getting financing, I have to sell out my warehouses, etc., etc. So I'm no longer interested in the scale of operations as I was before. However, I don't want to dispose of the concession, I still want to be a part of the joint venture, because as the markets improve, I will go back into the business of manufacturing of forest products. So they proposed a joint venture with Bai Shan Lin, and that was approved by them.
Is the Maserati still playing any role in this particular joint venture?
Yes, that's right. They have, I don't know, I think it's 25% shares in the joint venture. I can't remember exactly.
Is there any truth to reports that we've been having that they were not performing the annual allowable cut, that the Maseratis were not performing, and as such they were asked to enter into a joint venture? Is there any truth to that?
Absolutely. The company is the one to request a joint venture.
With Mr. Ramzan Ali?
Yes, yes. GFC does not impose any condition with that.
Could you tell us if there's any concessions that came along with this?
I don't know. I won't be.
You will not be able. Would you find it unusual, sir, that a company that is asking for concession would ask also for Lexuses and Infinities and so on as part of their fleets?
As I said, that's not a question for the Forestry Commission.
I'm asking you in the personal capacity.
I prefer not to answer the question.
Sure, sir. Thank you. Could you say what role GFC plays with the issuances of work permits to foreign companies over here in the forestry?
The company would make a request for specialist persons, whatever in the field. We would ask them to advertise, verify that they've advertised, and if they can't find suitable persons, then we would have an objection to the work permit.
Would that in the case, would the GFC have or has in its possession a breakdown maybe of how many no objections they would have given over the last 2 years?
I'll have to check the files. But basically what happens in any logging company, the ratio after about 5 years is supposed to be 85% for Guyanese to 50% expatriates. But in the startup of the operation, when they have to bring in persons to assemble factories or the training and so on, and drive the logging trucks, which normal people are not very familiar with and so on. We will allow them to bring in a higher percentage, provided that they do training of the local persons who can take up their positions in 2 or 3 years' time.
I hear you, Mr. Singh, but could Kaichur you specifically request that you provide us with the number of no objections that you would have received over the last 2 years, and to, if possible, break down towards particular companies?
Sure.
One last question, sir. Does Bai Shan Lin and any other companies that is foreign in the have concession on duty-free fuel, spare parts, and machinery? And if so, are they allowed to use them in third-party areas?
I won't be able to say.
Who would be able to say so?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Quick question. Could you tell me, please, the gross salary for average salary for one of the forest rangers?
Let me ask Mr. Bowman.
You have various categories of forest ranger, ranger 1, 2, and 3. Lowest, 50,000 plus the other allowances like station allowance to work with a particular location, plus their as well subsistence allowance.
150. The second scale is?
The second?
You said it's 3 scales. 1, 2, and 3?
Yep. All range between 50 to 65.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Singh, just a quick clarification. You said that Bai Shan Lin was suspended over a period of time from doing any sort of logging in Guyana. Could you say if this was done in 2007 when the Natural Resources Minister, Mr. Robert Prasad, was then Junior Forestry Minister, when he had banned Bai Shan Lin from on the grounds of commitments in the local processing? Is its connection the same thing?
I can't recall a time period.
Was it the same thing though?
No, I think there were some issues on. I can't remember. I have to check it. I have to check it by the.
But you do know that Bai Shan Lin was banned in 2007 by the minister, the Natural Resources Minister.
Yeah, Natural Resources Minister.
No, the Natural Resources Minister now, who was Junior Forestry Minister in 2007, he had banned Minister Prasad. He had banned Bai Shan Lin on the grounds of commitments of the local processing.
I am not sure. I have to check my files and I can provide that information. But I don't want to commit myself to doing something that's not practical.
No problem.
Okay, there's a gentleman at the back. Can you just have it in mic? Please, thank you. I trust that you're from a media house, sir, so that we don't have a short
There is Wamara. Sir, could you say how many forest rangers you actually require as your full complement? And secondly, over the last, say, 5 years or so, about how many of them have been fired and for what reasons in terms of corrupt transactions, trying to facilitate sales and exports onto the table?
The number, as I said, we have about 220 forest rangers right now, and they are doing an adequate and a very good job of policing the forest.
Right. But how much do you need on paper? What does the record say? Do you need 500, 400? What do you need?
Probably another 20 more or so. 20 more rangers the full complement. But the other one in terms of the officers who have been fired, we have certainly fired persons in the past for corrupt practices and so on. But I can't tell you offhand how much, but it would not be more than 5 to 10%.
And would that include trying to facilitate illegal exports?
It will be for not fulfilling their obligations properly, doing their work thoroughly as they're supposed to.
Does that include what I'm asking you? Including the facilitation of illegal exports? Or illegal logging?
Possibly. I don't think so.
Okay. Do you have any other questions? Could we get the mic passed back to the front, please? Thank you. Could you see if your mic is on?
I guess that I'm sure that we're very...
Sorry? I'm sorry, one second. Yes.
Mr. Commissioner, and it's right, I'm sure you were very interested in. Norway had not paid Ghana for year 3 of the agreement this year, which would be 2012. Can you shed any light on why?
I think that is a governmental negotiation that has been done. Our role as the Forestry Commission is to ensure that deforestation, degradation is kept to a minimum. And we have certain things within the joint concept notes that we have to do certain obligations. Like there is the certain assessment reports and independent forest monitoring and so on. So we have fulfilled our obligations to the letter and satisfactory fulfillment as well. In terms of payments and negotiation, that is probably the Ministry of Finance and the Office of Climate Change.
Just a follow-up. The last report was for 2012, which was year 3. 2013 has gone by. I'm sure you have some initial indication of what the deforestation rate was for last year. Can you say what it was?
Probably in a month's time. We are now accessing and scrutinizing the satellite imagery and so on.
So you have no idea whether it increased or decreased or remained the same?
We soon will. I don't want to give information that might be misrepresented.
Mr. Singh, can we be given a copy of the presentation you made at the software high?
Yes, I have the compact list.
Thank you.
And just to let you know that by Darnell, forest exported logs in January 2012.
Are there any other questions?
Final question from me.
Final question.
Final question. Mr. Solomon, Chairman of Region 10, has been lamenting that there has been no ESIA for operations in certain areas there. Can you comment on this? Is this so, or is it that it has been done but he just doesn't know about it?
The operations in Region 10 are mostly SFPs.
Okay.
And
The processing plant, sir?
oh, processing plant.
Yeah.
I think that's a process. That's a process right now.
But, so you can operate even without this being done?
No, they're not operating.
They're not
They're only
But they
clearing the
started,
site.
right?
Oh, they're not doing any process. There was a site there, an open site, and all they're doing is simply doing the foundation.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up question. With regards to the SFPs, let's talk about the Upper Berbice area. In whose names are the containers that are being taken out? Is it in the persons who are doing the login, the parent, or is it the concessionaires? I don't think I get it very clear. In whose names? Let's use Bai Shan Lin, for example. They are in some particular SFPs that they are operating using equipment and so on. At the end of the day, the containers are going out in those names. Is it in the name of Bai Shan Lin or the concessioners, the Logging Association? How is it?
The SFP operators.
Okay.
The rental agreement that they're in.
Bai Shan Lin started its limited harvesting. It is allowed to in the 3 SFPs, the former Sherwood Forest, the one area A and B, and have they started? Can you say which one it is?
They started in one SFP, 13.
So what is your interest?
01-13.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would Thank you very much for your questions. And we've been here quite a while, and I think we've answered you.
Just to clarify, the harvesting has started in July 2013 with the requisite approval. And secondly, at a later date, we will be invited to go on a field trip, to actually go on location and see some of the operations. Okay. Yeah. Well,
Commissioner.
Slide
Given all that you've said, Mr. Harman doesn't seem to trust the credibility of the information that you've been providing prior to your press conference. Would you still be willing to have an independent investigation done?
I can't go on Mr. Harman saying it doesn't trust.
Yes, it has. I can email you a copy of that article.
I can do that, yes.
But are you willing to, providing that it says that, and I prove that to you, are you willing to have an independent investigation done?
Well,
So just to say very briefly, and perhaps you can segue from Walbert's point about the Norway agreement. Every year we're subject to 3 independent assessments. We're subject to independent forest monitoring, which requires us to open any aspect of a forest operation, and the reports are made public. The reports are published from the company directly, so we get no chance to make any modifications or corrections or deletions to that report. Every year when we report on forest management level and the level of illegal logging, that is audited independently by a third party that is paid for by Norway and hired by Norway. That company was Diagnostic Veritas for the last 3 years. The company that audited independent forest monitoring is GFA Consulting Group, a company out of Germany. So those 2 happen every year. In addition to that, and I saw it in today's Starbuck News, allusion made to the European Union Forest Law Enforcement Governance and Trade Program. As part of that program, which we were quite advanced in terms of negotiating a voluntary partnership agreement, so that program is moving very well ahead in reaching to that stage. It has involved so far 2 assessments by the European Forest Institute of our systems. And what will be happening as a routine part of the development of the VPA and the implementation of the VPA is what is called independent audits. So as soon as that VPA is signed as well, that will become a permanent part of what will have to ensue either every year or every 2 years as part of independent audit. So that is currently what we have in place. That is currently what is done. And I can assure you, all of those reports are made public. So you can access them right now in terms of the Diagnostic Veritas reports. I know the Starbuck News has them because they would have reported on the findings of those reports. And soon to come will be the EU FLEG reports, which will speak in large part about the level of legality and the systems in place for legality. So whether there should be more audits on top of those audits is something I guess we would have to think about. There are 3 audits we endure every year. Every year we endure 3 audits, and those reports are made public. And I know that the media will report on some of them already.
Was this press conference held as a directive from the president to clear up the issues surrounding what has been in the media?
I don't know. I was on leave, and when I came back and I saw the misinformation of the paper, I said it needs for clarification.
So this was not a directive from the president? Thank you.
This was an initiative of the Ghana Forestry Commission. One thing I would like to emphasize is that I would like to thank all of you for coming. Secondly, I think that a lot of the stuff that is in the papers has been put there because of a lack of understanding of how forestry operations operate, lack of knowledge, and probably not enough research being done. And I would like to invite you to go on the GFC website. Almost all of the information that has been in the presentation and that Philippe has mentioned about the independent audits and so on, all of this information is on the GFC website. And I know You see, when things like this go in newspapers and censored, because of the internet and all these facilities, the information is not only restricted to Guyana, it is going overseas, globally, and it affects the markets of Guyana. And who are the ones that suffer? The community forestry operators, and the small operators, and the PSA holders and so on. I don't think it's the role of any newspaper or any media house to be doing that. I think the role of the newspapers and the media houses and so on is to highlight facts, but facts, the real facts, not to engage in speculation and mongering and those kinds of things. Because it does a disservice to the country and a disservice to people who depend on the forestry sector for a living. So I will caution persons to be prepared, read up on the facts. If you don't have the facts that you are unsure about something, contact the Forestry Commission. The Forestry Commission is open to listening to you, sharing information. And one other thing that I cannot understand, a certain newspaper, before this thing came out in the press, a newspaper reporter called me the afternoon before, and I spent about half an hour on the phone explaining everything, and lo and behold, it was totally different than reporting next morning. I was shocked when I saw a newspaper. I cannot understand. This to me is not professional. It is not professional. So I would like to urge us to be responsible citizens and to understand that whatever we write in the papers and put in the media affects the lives of people who depend on the work. Thank you very much.
Excellent, Mr. Singh. Excellent. Yeah.